earlier today, a letter surfaced, which was dated April 13th, so last week, written apparently, and it's from Stacy Plaskett, who likes to pretend she's a member of Congress. She sits on committees in Congress. She was one of the impeachment managers for Donald Trump's second impeachment trial. She became very popular on social media among liberals. She's a black woman who loves melodramatic liberal gestures about Donald Trump, and so she attracted a lot of attention. She represents the Virgin Islands, even though she was born in New York. She wasn't born in the Virgin Islands. She didn't grow up in the Virgin Islands. She went to the boarding school Choate, which is one of the most expensive boarding schools in the country. She spent a year abroad in France where she was educated. She went to Georgetown Law School. And she worked in and out of Washington firms and for members of Congress. And then she goes to the Virgin Islands backed by huge amounts of corporate cash and gets elected to represent the people of the Virgin Islands who are faced with all kinds of material deprivations. But she doesn't care at all about the people of the Virgin Islands. Why would she? She's never lived there. She barely has any connection to the island. So she spends all of her time on things like Trump impeachment and every Russiagate. She was a fanatical Russiagator. Anything that gets her social media attention. That's what she really wants to be. And the people of the Virgin Islands continue to suffer with no real representative. The Virgin Islands, of course, is not a state. They don't have members of Congress, but they give them delegates who are supposed to represent their interest. Even though she can't vote on the House floor, she votes in committee, but she's not a real member of Congress. She's a fake member of Congress. She's a delegate. And yet, today she wrote a letter to Matt Taibbi, who's a journalist, threatening him with prison based on this MSNBC segment that itself has been debunked. So let me show you what this letter says, because for all the talk about how Donald Trump was this grave threat to a free press, every time he would insult Jim Acosta or Wolf Blitzer or Chuck Todd, they would have op-eds in the New York Times and the Washington Post and cable segments, emergency cable segments convened to warn of the impending doom to a free press because Donald Trump insulted Jim Acosta. He never got close, Donald Trump, to any sort of threat to press freedom, like what Stacy Plaskett is doing here, other than the prosecution of Julian Assange, which ironically is the real press freedom threat that these journalists who made such melodrama out of Trump's threats to Jim Acosta never mention. And we'll see they'll never mention this as well. A member of Congress or a pseudo-member of Congress threatening a journalist with prosecution in prison. Here's what she wrote, quote, "On March 9th, immediately before your appearance before the subcommittee, you released an additional installment of the so-called Twitter files on your personal Twitter account. As part of that installment, you allege that the Election Integrity Partnership, EIP, worked with Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, a component of the Department of Homeland Security, to ask social media companies to remove disinformation on their platforms. You wrote, quote, "It's crucial to reiterate, EIP was partnered with state entities like CISA and GEC while seeking elimination of millions of tweets. In the Twitter files, Twitter execs did not distinguish between organizations, using phrases like, according to CISA, escalated via EIP." Then she writes to him, "When you appeared before the House Judiciary Committee on Weaponization, you told Congressman Stewart, Republican of Utah, quote, what we see is that in the Twitter files is that Twitter executives did not distinguish between DHS or CISA and this group EIP. For instance, we would see a communication that said from CISA escalated by EIP, so they were essentially identical in the eyes of the company. So yes, we have come to the realization that this bright line that we imagine that exists between, say, the FBI or the DHS or the GEC and these private companies is illusory, and that what's more important is this constellation of the kind of quasi-private organizations that do this work." Now here's what Delegate Plaskett says to Taibbi, quote, "The above statements now seem to be contradicted by your own admission. On April 6, 2023, you appeared on an interview on the Mehdi Hasan show on MSNBC. During that interview, Mr. Hasan pointed out that your March 9th tweet added a parenthetical A to the acronym CIS, changing the meaning of the term from Center for Internet Security, a private organization, to Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. This mistake is important because by adding an A, you weren't making a harmless spelling error. Rather, you were alleging that CISA, a government entity, was working with EIP to have posts removed from social media. When presented with this misinformation, you acknowledged that you had made, quote, an error by intentionally altering the acronym CIS, and you subsequently deleted your erroneous tweet. That is an absolute lie, what she just said there. I just showed you the video. Did Matt Taibbi admit that he intentionally altered the acronym? She says here, quote, you acknowledge that you had made a, quote, error by intentionally altering the acronym CIS. That is not even remotely what Matt Taibbi said. He, in good faith, accepted Mehdi Hasan's false claim that he had confused the acronyms throughout the reporting, and then she takes that and says he acknowledged that he intentionally altered the acronym. Let's continue with this letter. Prior to your appearance before the subcommittee on March 9th, you signed the Judiciary Committee's Truth and Testimony form, certifying that you understood that, quote, knowingly providing material false information to this subcommittee, or knowingly concealing material information from this subcommittee is a crime. 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. In addition, at the beginning of the March 9th hearing, you swore, quote, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you were about to give was true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief. Under the federal perjury statute, 18 U.S. Code Section 1621, providing false information is punishable by up to 5 years imprisonment. For all of these reasons, I am sure you understand the importance of ensuring that your testimony is true and accurate. I look forward to your prompt response. Now, if there's anything more despotic than a member of Congress very explicitly threatening a journalist with 5 years imprisonment and prosecution over what she claims is a mistaken acronym based on an MSNBC segment that she uncritically ingested and has no idea was debunked, I'd like to know what it is. Tell me, anyone, what Donald Trump did that even got in the same universe as threatening press freedoms, then writing a letter to a journalist, threatening them with prison based on this incredibly trivial allegation that you've made that he made a mistake in doing. And I want to emphasize this because this is the real context here. When Mehdi Hasan and all of these liberals in the media and these liberal politicians, AOC did it as well, stand up and express anger at the Twitter files and the journalist who reported it, what they're really doing is running interference they're defending the U.S. security state. They're angrily defending the CIA, the FBI, Homeland Security, and saying, how dare you accuse these agencies, these honorable agencies, of censoring the internet? They're being unjustly accused. This is what Democrats are working to do. This is why she's threatening a journalist, to defend the U.S. security state. Now, let's just take a look at what happened on that day at the hearing. We covered this extensively, but let me just remind you of what Stacy Plaskett and her Democrats on this committee said and did during this hearing, because the context for all of this, and this is why I wanted to cover this story today, goes way beyond just a letter from a fake member of Congress threatening a journalist with prison, which would be bad enough. It is about the fact that Democrats passionately believe in the censorship regime that the U.S. security state has imposed. They're defenders of it. And what they're really angry about with Matt Taibbi and these other journalists and Elon Musk for enabling it is that they exposed it. They exposed it. And it reminds me a lot, I'm not comparing the stories, but it reminds me a lot of what happened when we exposed in 2013 and 2014 the domestic spying regime that the NSA had constructed, spying on millions of Americans. The people who attacked me, the people who attacked the reporting, were the people who believed in that spying machine, who believed in that spying system, who set it up, who defended it, who wanted Americans indiscriminately spied on, and they were angry at me and Edward Snowden and other people with whom I worked because we exposed that which they supported. And the same thing has happened whenever I've exposed secrets. Here in Brazil, when we exposed the corruption on the part of the highest level judges and prosecutors in cheating to politicize the judiciary and punish the politicians that they wanted to render ineligible, much like the Democrats are doing in the United States now with multiple pending prosecutions against Donald Trump. The people who were angry at us were the people who supported the corruption, who were happy the corruption happened, and therefore angry that it got revealed. That's always how it works. Obviously, Stacy Plaskett is not threatening Matt Taibbi with prison because he made a mistake in an acronym. She's threatening him with prison because she's enraged that he exposed something that she wants to continue. which is the censorship regime imposed by the US government that routinely censors dissidents of establishment orthodoxy and adversaries of the neoliberal order. That is really what she's angry about. So let's watch how she behaved on that day, this fake member of Congress, just a few short clips from the time that Matt Taibbi and Michael Schnellenberger testified.
And to praise him for his work. This isn't just a matter of what data was given to these so-called journalists before us now. There are many legitimate questions about where Musk got the financing to buy Twitter. We know it's a matter of what data was given to these so-called journalists before us now.
These so-called journalists. That's how she's referring to Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger after they just broke this huge story, when she is the so-called member of Congress. So that's the contempt she heaped on them. Let's watch another one.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not exaggerating when I say that you have called before you two witnesses who pose a direct threat to people who oppose them.
Of all the things that the media accused Trump of doing to endanger press freedom, the thing they often harped on the most was that he called them the enemy of the people. The enemy of the people. Listen to what she said about these journalists.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not exaggerating when I say that you have called before you two witnesses who pose a direct threat to people who oppose them.
These people pose a direct threat to those who oppose them. And then here's one more.
Correct?
That's correct, yes.
And then who gave you access to these emails? Who was the individual that gave you permission to access the emails?
Well, the attribution from my story is sources at Twitter, and that's what I'm going to refer to.
Okay. Did Mr. Musk contact you, Mr. Taibbi?
Again, the attribution from my story is sources at Twitter.
Mr. Schellenberger, did Mr. Musk contact you?
Actually, no. I was brought in by my friend Barry Weiss, and so this story, there's been a lot of misinformation.
So Mr. Weiss brought you in. Mr. Taibbi, Ms. Weiss, thank you. Mr. Taibbi, have you had conversations with Elon Musk?
I have.
Okay. Mr. Taibbi, did Mr. Musk place any conditions on the use of the
Would the gentlelady yield for a second?
as long as my time is not used.
Are you trying to get journalists?
No, I'm not trying to
expose
get.
their
No,
sources?
I'm not.
Well,
I
it
am
sure sounds
asking.
like it.
No, well.
Have you seen a liar more brazen than that? It reminded me of that time we showed you recently when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spent 90 seconds saying that the Biden administration should ignore court orders in the case of the abortion pill. And then when a CNN host said, are you saying the government should ignore court orders when they don't like the ruling? She said, no, of course I'm not saying that. She sat there for 45 seconds demanding that Taibbi reveal his source. And then when Jim Jordan said, are you insisting journalists reveal their source? She said, no, I'm not. You just watched her do it for 45 straight seconds. But here's the most important clip I want to show you. This is a really important one. It's from Colin Allred, who is the Democrat from Texas, because he was very candid and honest about the real position of the Democratic Party at this hearing. And this is why this story matters so much. He explicitly urged Matt Taibbi to try and open his mind and accept the fact that we should be grateful to the security state for censoring the internet, that this is a good thing. Listen to what he said.
We live in an information age where malign actors do want to use social media to influence our elections, both big, the ones that you've spent a lot of time talking about, and small, like mine.
Mr. Congressman,
And
may
it
I
should
ask
be a
a question?
bipartisan goal. No, you don't get to ask questions here.
Okay.
It should be a bipartisan goal.
Let me just stop there too, because that's such a bizarre thing to say. You don't get to ask questions here. You just sit and listen. Why invite them there? This is such an abuse of power. I couldn't imagine having a platform where I have somebody in front of me and I hurl accusations at them of every single conceivable kind. And then when they go to respond or defend themselves, you cut them off because it's the only tiny little power you have and tell them to shut up and listen. So listen to what he wanted them to listen to.
To ensure that Americans and only Americans determine the outcome of our elections, not fear-mongering. And I hope that you can actually take this with you, because I honestly hope that you will grapple with this. That it may be possible that if we can take off the tinfoil hat, that there's not a vast conspiracy, but that ordinary folks and national security agencies responsible for our security are trying their best to find a way to make sure that our online discourse doesn't get people hurt or see our democracy undermined. And that the very rights that you think they're trying to undermine, they may be trying to protect. And I yield back.
I mean, that is amazing. It really is amazing. 45 years ago, the Democrats in Congress were leading the Church Committee, investigating all the nefarious acts undertaken by the U.S. security state. Fast forward 45 years later, and the Democrats are the ones demanding that people express gratitude to the U.S. security state, that they understand that the censorship regime they've imposed is for our own good. They're protecting our democracy by controlling the source of information. Now, we have for you here a huge number of articles in which Donald Trump was accused of being a menace to a free press. And I went through them all. Here you see just from, I'm not sure where this is from, but the headline there is Donald Trump's attacks on the press are an attack on democracy. I believe it's from Nation magazine from August 2018. The president is trying to construct an alternative reality where he alone tells the truth. What attacks on the press did Donald Trump launch that were even close to what this fake Congresswoman is doing? Here from April 2020 from IGNIT, the headline is Trump administration threatens press freedom. The CPJ report finds, that's the Committee to Protect Journalists. So you can go through it over and over. This is a major theme here from The Independent. Trump is the biggest threat to press freedom in the U.S. in my lifetime, says Dan Rather. And if you just look at the article here, the closest thing would be the Nixon years. However, there are great differences between now and the Nixon time. This is unprecedented. Here you have my staff actually prepared an interesting chart here that shows that after Dan Rather said that Donald Trump is the greatest threat to press freedom, he barely ever has talked about Julian Assange. In fact, here he says Dan gives his thoughts on Julian Assange and whether news has become more entertainment than news. So this idea that Donald Trump was a great threat to press freedom because he went around insulting journalists was a major theme of the media for years. And yet here we have let's call our member of Congress, just for the moment, to indulge the humorous pretense, the conceit that she likes to use, on official letterhead, writing a letter to a journalist invoking prosecution and 5 years in prison because he confused an acronym, and she has no idea. She really is completely ignorant of the fact that one of the most prominent and accomplished investigative journalists in the country, Li Fang, went and debunked the MSNBC segment. She did nothing in preparation for this letter other than sit and watch an MSNBC segment, and then mindlessly wrote down what she heard on the TV, and then threatened a journalist with prison. And you will not hear any Democrat, not a Democratic member of Congress, not a prominent member of the media, condemn this. And again, the key context here is that the Democratic Party supports the censorship regime. And that is the context in which this is all taking place. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.